Happy Friday, everybody. I do like Fridays, not just for the fact that it's so the weekend, but I usually get to talk about the fun stuff on Fridays. And you think I'd strategize better if I hate Wednesdays so much, I'd put all the fun stuff on Wednesdays. That way I wouldn't hate it so much. But if I figure if I'm going to be in misery, I might as well dump as much misery into that day as possible, as humanly possible. That's why I do my NetSuite stuff in AIS on Wednesdays now. Yeah, so yeah, guys. All right, so today we're going to be doing kind of our standard protocol for Fridays moving forward. We're going to be talking about bad blood, and then we're going to be talking about CPA prep. Now, hopefully, you know that by this point when I say bad blood, I'm not talking about this Taylor Swift song. Though I do say that if this ever gets converted to a movie, it was supposed to be a movie. It actually got turned into a series called The Dropout. This is actually not a bad series. I'm going to talk about some of the distinctions. It's very interesting because something you're going to find over the book is the book tries to be somewhat objective, but it does have a jaded perspective, and it does kind of make Elizabeth Holmes to be the villain. When Amanda Seyfried did the version of Elizabeth Holmes in the TV show, there's some more subjective information input there. They kind of just aggregated over events for storytelling, and she tried to make her a little bit more sympathetic, and that's true for some of the characters in there, which I thought was interesting. This is a much different perspective. So just so you know, if you want to watch this Hulu series, it's very good. I very much enjoyed it. If you try to answer the quiz questions based on the Hulu series, you're going to miss some of the questions, okay? Because some of the information in the Dropout was they did some licensing. They took free reign with the storytelling, okay? And interestingly, some of the stuff that was not necessarily objective was put in the series, and some things I didn't know about, and it was like, oh wow, that was really unfortunate. And so they do try to make her a little bit more sympathetic character in the TV show as opposed to the book. But it was actually going to be licensed as a movie, and Jennifer Lawrence was actually going to be playing Elizabeth Holmes. This is going to be written by the same guy who did The Big Short, Adam McKay. It's a very well director, was collaborated with Will Ferrell on many occasions for different movies. But that I think ended up falling through, and they ended up doing it as a TV series. Very good. So today you had to read the prologue, chapter 1 and chapter 2, and prologue kind of starts out with the ways that the book is going to approach from the start, saying what kind of person is Elizabeth Holmes? How can we characterize very upbeat, very big salesperson, can actually convince you of something, but if you make her your enemy, woe behold you, woe behold you. So basically, the CFO Henry Moseley came in and said, I heard that there was some problems with the way things were working, and Elizabeth's like, oh, it's not a big deal. We'll get things worked out. Says, I'm not comfortable with this. We are misleading investors. We're committing fraud, is basically what he said. And you know what she said? She said, get out. Get out. All right. So Henry Moseley is now kicked to the curb. Henry Moseley is not done. We're going to see him, some mentions of him a little bit later on. He basically got the shaft pretty badly. They kind of made him the villain in the story, and you're going to see a couple of times where it talks about. I think they actually refer to it in chapter 1 or chapter 2, like that they said that he was embezzling. There were a lot of rumors put forth about why Henry Moseley was let go, and he was trying to be a good guy, and he got put as the bad guy. But that's not the first time we'll see it, or the last time. By the way, get very used to when we start talking about examples, saying this is not the only time we'll see this in the book. I'm going to say it a lot, okay? I can't help it because there's a lot of things going on. So chapter 1 talks a little bit about Elizabeth Holmes. I will say the interesting thing about Elizabeth Holmes as a character is that it's kind of an interesting duality, is that she's obviously very motivated, has this drive to want to change the world. And the lessons that she learned from her father, because her great-great-grandfather was the founder of the Fleischmann Yeast Company. And then her great-grandfather was also similarly successful. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they had very big financial success and were very, very well known and well respected. And then it was her grandfather or great-grandfather and grandfather who kind of drove the company or the finances into ruin. And so her father is just always complaining about, here's what happens when you don't take things seriously. You don't go for a purpose-driven life. And so that was her motto. That was her slogan. And it's very interesting. I think Christian Holmes will be a very interesting character as well throughout the book, because he kind of influences some of the decisions and the ideas that Elizabeth has. And I don't know too much about him as an actual human being, just what the book characterizes him as. But it's he comes off as being a hero in some situations and a villain in other situations. But that's kind of what's driven. And so Elizabeth kind of 10th grade takes off, becomes a straight A student, gets in Stanford, which, Stanford, the Truman of the West Coast. So she's doing pretty well. She gets in favorable with Channing Robertson, who's, professor there, who's like infinitely more hip than I am, infinitely more hip. He wears leather jackets, and he's actually got a full head of hair. And he teaches chemical engineering, and she gets in well. And she decides a little bit later on, you know what, I'm too good for this. I want to start my own company. And so she starts out a new company. And so she starts her company with a PhD student, and the idea is they're going to develop this new medical device that she developed over the summer after doing blood testing for a summer. Because that's all you need to become an expert in blood testing, is to actually draw blood for a summer. And you can become an expert in engineering and immunoassays and all things like that. So she comes with an idea, and Channing Robinson's just so kind of starstruck with her. She's kind of like, this is a great idea. You should start up a company. To a 19-year-old young lady and come up with ideas. And don't get me wrong, I have very high opinions of everybody in this room. I am not going to encourage you to go out and start a company and drop out of college. All right, I think that's a bad idea. I think there's a lot that you still need to learn. And so Channing Robinson can do that, and she starts up a company called Real-Time Cures, or as the paycheck says, Real-Time Curses. Okay, Real-Time Curses. That was almost a quiz question, by the way. It was the name of the company on the paycheck, Real-Time Curses. So that was the thing, and then she changes it to Theranos, which is a very interesting name, and there's going to be some dissemination of the etymology of that name a little bit later in the book. In the fact that Theranos is supposed to be a combination of therapy and diagnosis, but it sounds like a really dark term. It sounds like a really dark Greek word. So Theranos, and they grow and they expand, and things are going reasonably well. And so Elizabeth's got this idea that she wants to do this patch that can actually administer treatments. They come with the idea that everything she wants is science fiction, so they have to tone it down. Eventually, she comes up with a blood testing device, like a glucose monitor, but it tests blood, and it can do a whole bunch of different tests. And by the way, this is the theme for the entire book, is this blood testing device. And the ambitions only grow as time goes by. You kind of see early on the struggles they're having. It's like she wants to do all this blood testing on a drop of blood. The idea being is that, has anybody ever had their blood tested or done a blood test? Or actually, have you ever donated blood? Things like that. So similar treatment. If you've donated blood or had blood tests, they draw really large amounts of blood from you. And her idea, she's got a phobia of needles, as does her mother, and she's saying, we could do this more efficiently. If we could do this, we could break into a market much greater, much larger market than lab goods. So her idea was that she wants a drop of blood, and she fixates on this for the entire duration of this chapter. And again, spoiler, for the entire duration of the book. The idea being is that just take a drop of blood and you can do all these things. And there's a whole bunch of problems with this, is that this is basically kind of like Star Trek science fiction type stuff. And they're trying to say, how can we do this? And so it brings in an engineer called Ed Koo, who's kind of like, all right, I'm going to have to work really long hours. And Elizabeth's like, you're not working long hours enough. I want 24 hours a day out of you. And he's like, yeah, good luck with that. Okay. We are not accountants. We don't work that kind of busy season. So, I shouldn't say stuff like that to a group of soon-to-be accountants, should I? All right. She basically says, this is a problem. I'm going to bring in a separate engineering team. By the way, did you catch one of the interesting points about the nature of the engineering relationship to chemistry? You think if you've got this complex medical device that you're trying to engineer and that's never been built before, you'd want to have some sort of communication, at least some sort of information exchange between the different departments within the organization. Is that what was happening in Theranos? It was not what was happening in Theranos. Basically, engineering had no idea what chemistry is doing and vice versa. They actually talked about it. Ed Koo could not actually determine if the problems that he was experiencing were his problems on the engineering side or problems on the chemistry side. And so this actually, we're going to be talking about some very fundamental concepts related to auditing that are conveyed in this book. This is one of the very first ones, has to do with transparency, okay? Now, transparency in this regard is operational transparency, which the only reason I bring this up is that we're going to see some transparency issues a little bit later on. And those actually get foreshadowed by what happens at the end of chapter 2 when they say lawsuit, lawsuit, lawsuit. Lots of lawsuits in this book, lots of lawsuits in this book. So If you get bored about reading lawsuits, maybe take your book over to Professor Templeton and he'll get excited reading. Gets into a competition. EdCoo loses the competition to a glue robot. Okay, and that's where we're at. The new Theranos device still can't do everything that Elizabeth Holmes wants it to do, but it's streamlined and it's kind of cool, and it can actually do the movements like a glue robot. It's programmed to look cool. All right, so that's where we're at right now. We've been introduced to a gentleman named Sonny. Sonny will play a much larger role in this particular book moving forward. I want you to keep in mind that don't forget about Sonny, because Sonny is coming back. Anything else you guys noticed that you were just kind of like, oh, this is interesting, this is crazy? We're going to see a lot of things. There's something interesting to note on the board of directors. Talked about some of the big shots are on the board of directors. I think Don Lucas was one of them, and there was another one I can't remember off the top. Also, Larry Elson's not on the board, but did provide funding for it. Is there an interesting fact about the board of directors? As we're going to see, the board of director composition is going to be made up of very big dignitaries, people who are very, very well known. Guess what they don't do? The board of directors, they don't have knowledge about the medical field, about medical technology. Now, if you're a company that starts specializing in the development of medical devices, would it be something that you probably want to have an expert in that area on the board of directors? Yeah. Is there a parallel to that? Something we talk about with respect to composition of audit committees? Yeah, financial experts. Okay. So something to keep in mind here is that there are some parallels here to things that we've talked about, and they're intuitively sensible, but we have to think about it. Again, some big deals that we'll talk about a little bit later. So what do you guys think so far? Into the book? Didn't read it? So I'm sorry. Hopefully everybody read it. It actually picks up. It's not too bad considering it's only 300 something pages. What we're going to be going at. Like I said, there's a lot of different interpretations of this. This is my favorite interpretation because it's probably the first one I had. So this is what we're going to be talking about. I'll be very interested to see what your perspective is moving forward. I will say that I've done this in several classes. This is only the second time I've done this at the graduate level. Graduate students started having conversations about this once they started reading forward. I had more than one graduate student that got into it about halfway through and said, I'm reading the rest of the book. This is now I got to get to the climax. And so, by the way, I will not advance your quizzes based on where you're at in the book. You still have to actually keep up with what we're reading in a particular class period. All right, let's go ahead and let's talk about CPA prep, shall we? All right, so starting out with some basic concepts with respect to the overall framing of the audit, and moving forward to that, we're going to be talking about reporting. Becker is really weird in the way they structured this, is that they start with audit reports because they say that kind of frames the overall discussion of audit, because all the elements of the audit are contained in the audit reports, which makes sense, but that seems like to me putting the cart before the horse in some regards. That being said, we are only going to touch kind of the very basic level here. We're going to keep it at a fairly high level to start. So which of the following best describes what is meant by the term generally accepted auditing standards? Now, this is not something we've discussed a lot about, but what do we mean by generally accepted auditing standards? And I've said that there's 3 different categories of generally accepted auditing standards. There's actually 10 of them, both the ASB and the PCAOB, and they cover general guidelines for conduct of audit, the guidelines governing field work, and the guidelines governing reporting. But for the most part, these are mostly quality control devices. All right, they don't actually dictate the nature of procedures that are being performed. So if you keep that in mind, when we talk about generally accepted auditing standards, would it say that these are rules acknowledged by the accounting profession because they're used in universal application? So what's the problematic word here? Universal is probably a problematic word too, but I was looking specifically at accounting profession. Are we dealing with the accounting profession as a whole here? No, we're in an auditing class, okay? We're in an auditing class. So even though we deal with accounting at a very general level, we're not dealing specifically. Generally accepted auditing standards are not applicable to the accounting profession as a whole. Pronouncements issued by an auditing standards board. These are auditing standards, and we're going to talk about these at length in this particular course, but these are not generally accepted auditing standards. These are specific auditing standards for guidelines of conduct of the audit. Measures the quality of the auditor's performance. Does that sound like what I was just talking about? Sure does, and that's why C is our answer. C is our answer, but procedures used to gather evidence to support financial statements. This is going to be evidence gathering. We're already familiar with this, but this is not gas. All right, something a little bit more familiar to everybody. Which of the following terms identifies a requirement for audit evidence? Okay, Is appropriate evidence a requirement for audit evidence? It is. It is. It's actually one of two requirements we talked about. What was the other one, by the way? Sufficient and appropriate audit evidence, which this is good because we get that one out of the way. We don't have to talk about the rest because the rest, they sound good, but they're not requirements, specifically defined requirements. Which of the following properly describes the auditor's responsibilities as opposed to management's responsibilities? Now, hopefully everybody in this room knows this by now, but I'm going to tell you, if you are not clear on this, you better get clear quick, because this is a really important thing to note with respect to the conduct of an audit. All right. So let's deal with management's responsibilities first. With respect to financial statements, what does management have the responsibility for? Preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements. With respect to internal controls, what do they have responsibility for?
Sure. Statements are free.
Not the auditor's responsibility here. What is with respect to management responsibilities of internal controls? Design, implementation, and maintenance. Okay. They actually do make an assessment of the effectiveness of internal controls too, so you weren't far off. Okay, but the management responsibility in generally speaking, preparation, presentation of financial statements, design, implementation, and maintenance of internal controls. Auditor's responsibility with respect to financial statements.
Reasonable assurance for material misstatements.
Right. For obtain reasonable assurance they're free from material misstatements. With respect to internal controls, what is the auditor responsibility? Understanding and in many situations testing to determine that controls are designed and operating effectively. By the way, if I don't test internal controls, do I have to obtain an understanding of internal controls as an auditor? Yes, 100% of the time. Okay, understanding is always required, even if testing is not required. All right, let's go through the answers. Auditor is responsible for the entity's financial statements. Is that statement even close to correct? No, we can toss out A. Auditor is responsible for identifying the laws and regulations applicable to entity's activities. Is that statement correct? No. Manager is responsible for the entity's financial statements. The auditor is responsible for the selection and application of accounting principles. We were so close. First statement was correct. Second statement, does the auditor decide what accounting principles are going to be used? It says, you know what, this year I think I'm going to have to use tax basis. Next year, who knows? I may have to use a regulatory basis. We'll do cash basis in the third year. Wouldn't that be fun? Just like have a roulette wheel with all accounting principles and the auditor just kind of randomly choose. Yeah. Okay. All right. Manager is responsible for referring the effects of any corrected misstatements in the financial statements and are immaterial. Okay. So we didn't specifically talk about that, but is that a true statement? That is a correct statement. That is one of their responsibilities. Auditor is responsible for obtaining reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements are free material misstatements. That is a correct statement. One of the ones we specifically talked about. So D is our answer. All right. Wilson CPA obtained sufficient appropriate audit evidence to render opinion on APCO's December 31st year one financial statements on March 6th, year two. A subsequent event requiring adjustments to the year one financial statements occur on April 10th, year two. Wilson decides not to dual date the report and completes and extends its audit procedures for subsequent events on April 24th, year two. If the adjustment is made without disclosure of the event, Wilson's report ordinarily should be dated. So the question is, what is going to be doing? So it says use dual dating, and it specifically says in the problem, we're not using dual dating. Okay. So we can eliminate D. If that's the case, we can also eliminate A because A is dual dating. Okay. A is dual dating. So it's going to be B or C. The question is it the date of the subsequent event or the date the auditor completed testing? And here's a hint. I talked about this on Wednesday. Okay. So if you remember, we talked about this on Wednesday. I specifically said it's going to be the date of complete testing. So it's going to be April 24th, year two. So C is our answer. C is our answer. Which of the following events that occurred after a client's calendar year end, but before the audit report date, would require disclosure in the notes of the financial statements, but no adjustments to the financial statements? So this is a subsequent event. We've got a subsequent event here. What type of subsequent event? Is it type 1 or type 2 that's being discussed here? What do you guys think? Type 1 or type 2? Hold up a finger, not that finger. Type 2. It's type 2 event, okay? Type 2 event, all right? So which one's going to be a type 2 event? New convertible bonds are issued to expand the company's product line. Does that sound like a type 2 event? Yeah, that doesn't have anything to do with the previous period, okay? Conditions not exist in the balance sheet date. Let's go through the rest just for context. A loss is reported on collectible accounts acknowledged distressed customer. So the customer, we knew they were distressed as of the financial statement date, so the conditions did exist at year end. This is the type 1 event. Fixed asset used in operations is sold at a substantial profit. This is not a subsequent event, okay? That's just a sale, okay? Negotiations results in compensation adjustments for union employees retroactive to the fourth quarter. That word retroactive is really important. That means the situation existed at the balance sheet dates, and so they're restating the financials. So D is going to be a type 1 subsequent event. All right. An annual shareholders report includes the audited financial statements and contains a report on management operations. The audited financial statements are fairly stated. The auditor is not engaged to report on the other information included in the annual report, but the auditor notices there's material inconsistency between the amount of revenue reported by management in the report and operations, the amount of revenue reported in the audited financial statements. All right. So first of all, does the auditor have a responsibility to audit information that is not part of the financial statements? So we're talking about other information. So we're talking like an annual report. Does the auditor have responsibility to audit the annual report? 50% chance, guys. No. The answer is no. Okay. Do they have to determine if the information that's used from the financial statements is materially consistent with the information? So if they use annual report information, financial statement information in another format, it has to be materially consistent. The auditors have to verify that. The auditor has now determined that that is not the case, that the annual report information, this is information externally disclosed, is not consistent with the financial statements. All right. So here you're in the situation of the auditor. So that first of all, that's important to note. Okay. Not a responsibility to audit, but you do have to make sure that it's going to be consistent. They can't say if they had a $1 billion loss in the period, they can't report $1 billion gain, all right, or $1 billion income. So it has to be consistent between the two. So what would be the case? If management refuses to make the revision of the revenue included in management's report on operations, the auditor least likely would do what? So we're going to look at situations. Then this is really confusing because now we have to identify what are some possible remediations and identify which one would not be a remediation for the auditor. So let's just go through each of these individually and say, is this something that auditor would be likely to do in this scenario? Okay. Included in the auditor's report a separate section with the heading other information describing the inconsistency. What do you think? Would that be something that auditor could do? Yeah, I think that auditor could do that. I think that would be pretty reasonable because management's refusing to make an adjustment. We have to actually have some recourse in saying, yeah, management's not doing good things. They're misrepresenting their position, and that's a possibility. Okay. Withhold the use of the auditor's report. I think this would be more likely than A. Okay, and A is a possibility. So A and B are both possibilities. Okay. Withdraw from the engagement. Yeah, you just get ticked off. Management's like, you're using my information wrong. It's like the scientist in those movies that the evil villain uses their inventions for bad. The scientist should say, I withdraw from the engagement. Okay. So the auditor is going to do. They're going to withdraw from the engagement because they don't want their information to be used incorrectly. So all possibilities. A is our least likely possibility. Let's look at D. Modify the opinion on the audited financial statements to a qualified or adverse opinion. Now, here's an interesting question. This sure sounds like a possibility, but has the client done anything wrong with respect to the financial statements? No, this is not about the financial statements. This is about the management's reports. Okay, management report. The financial statements are correct. They are materially correct, so we can't issue a qualified or adverse opinion saying the financial statements are wrong. Remember, this report specifically relates to the financial statements, the audited financial statements. So D is not going to be something that an auditor would do. All right, A, B, and C are all possible remediations. D would not be. Helpful company, a not-for-profit entity, prepared its financial statements on account. What's that?
Was the answer to 6A what D?
So it said basically the answer is the auditor is least likely would. So we're looking for the least possible, the scenario the auditor would least like possibly do, which would be D. It was a really poorly worded question. Okay, it was a really poorly worded question because it puts you in one direction, then you have to actually make an adjustment, and then you have to capture least likely. I should probably do this. Here we go. Control B, control underline, make the font much larger. There we go. All right. To be fair, it's easy to miss that one. It's easy to miss that. I do sometimes when it's a negative or a negative information, like say the auditor would not do something, or auditor would least likely. I do try to underline that. I just missed that one. This one. So keep an eye out for that. I will say it's a good practice to get into, read the question, because they won't do that on the CPA exam. They won't highlight not, or they won't highlight least likely. You do have to keep your eye out on that. Helpful company, a not-for-profit entity, prepares financial statements on an accounting basis prescribed by a regulatory agency solely for filing with that agency. Green audited the financial statements in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, and concluded the financial statements were fairly presented on the prescribed basis. Green should issue a what? All right. What do you guys think? Is there a problem with issuing on an opinion on basis of accounting presentation other than GAAP? So if we're talking about a publicly traded company, the answer would be yes. We can only do it. We can only report on generally accepted accounting principles. or IFRS, but if we're talking about an international company, but for the most part, generally accepted accounting principles for a publicly traded company. But this is a not-for-profit entity, so it's probably not publicly traded. Very, very weird that it would be, okay? And it's using a basis of a presentation other than GAAP, which is certainly fine for a not-for-profit entity, okay? It's a regulatory basis. So in this situation, if there are no other circumstances that would lead to an improper conclusion, like a qualified opinion, adverse opinion, disclaimer opinion, we just issue a single unmodified opinion on the special purpose financial statements. D is our answer. All right, how do we feel, guys? Do pretty well, reasonably well. Did anybody go 0 for 7? If you did, I'm going to feel bad. Okay. Hopefully we didn't hit you there. But yeah, you don't have to announce that to the class. You can just announce that to me in person. It's like, 0 for 7, Dr. Barnes. But yeah, you don't even have to share that with me. I'm gonna assume everybody was 7 for 7 on this, except for Lotus because she missed the least.
I got it right.
Oh,
I
yeah.
misread the answer, but I got it right. But I was wrong at the same time.
See, that's where you want to be on the CPA exams. Even if you misread the answer, or misread the question, you still get the answer correct. Okay, that means you're swinging 1,000 right there. And I want to swing
I
1,000.
usually that means I'm trying with the force, because like
Yeah, I believe so too. All right, so we're doing some analytical procedures. So this is an analytical procedure over revenue, which I don't know how relevant this is going to be, but I do think it's an interesting piece of information where we can identify what needs to be done here. So let's go ahead and let's break it down and see what we got. So basically, for each one of these calculations, we're going to actually put in the auditor's calculation the expectation for year 2 and year 1 where it's applicable, round all amounts and percentages. Then we're going to evaluate the reliability of data and evaluate its significance for each of the different analytical procedures and whether or not we can, what the conclusion to be reached is. So I will say I have a grievance with Becker on this particular question. I think it's misleading. All right. We'll talk about what that grievance here is in just a second. All right. So the first one is basically using gross margin percentage. All right. And let's go ahead and do our calculations here. So gross margin percentage, obviously you need to know what gross margin is. Now, hopefully you haven't forgotten that. Hopefully you know gross margin is just going to be gross margin divided by sales. And if we go to the income statement, it actually doesn't even give us gross margin, but that's pretty easy to calculate. Gross margin of sales minus cost of sales. Okay, so we get gross margin, we divide that by sales. So we do the calculation here. What do we come up with gross margin percentage for? Let's do year 1 first. 39.8. Yeah, like 39.79, but I just kind of rounded up to the nearest decimal place. What do you guys think for year 2? 41.9, yeah, 41.93. We're just going to use the nearest decimal place. So if we look at this, there's 2 ways to interpret the year-over-year percentage change, and they're both very relevant, okay? The way that I answered this question is I said 2.1%, or sorry, 2.1%, which is sensible. That's just 41.9 minus 39.8, all right? And if that's the case, what is our conclusion going to be about the materiality of the difference? It's not material because it's less than 4%, which was our range that was specified here in this particular problem. Now, I will tell you, Becker does not give that answer, all right? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, do not panic on this. So what if I get this wrong on the CPA exam? This question would never appear on the CPA exam, okay? This is more of a conceptual challenge than it is that this is something you should prepare for, guys. The way that Becker interprets this is they say, what is the percentage change from period to period? So if we say, all right, what is 2.1% of 39.8? So 2.1 divided by 39.8. That's a 5% change according to them because they're taking the percentage change of the percentage change. That seems needlessly complex. Does anybody agree with me on that? I hope you agree with me on that, because if you agree with me on that, then you're going to be on my good side, and you want to stay on my good side in this class. But I do want to specify that this is something that Becker actually specifies. They say this is a 5.2% change. I understand the logic behind it. I do not agree with it. Probably the more sufficient evidence that I would say is if I was considering about whether or not which answer would be if I was trying to torn between the 2 possibilities. If you look at the 2.1% change and multiply this times what the sales revenue is, that's actually only like 20-something thousand dollars. So even though they don't advocate for materiality at 40,000 for this type of analysis, it is less than 40,000, which was kind of the what split the decision for me. So we're going to go with my answer. Becker answer is inconsistent. Becker say the difference is material, further evidence is required. I'm going to say the difference is immaterial, no further investigation is necessary. What do you guys think about the reliability of this particular piece of data? What do you guys think? Is this going to be reliable, unreliable? I hear some nods of reliability, so I'm assuming everybody thinks it's reliable. I would agree with that, okay? This is going to be part of financial statements that are pre-audit, will be audited. We can verify that information is correct. So part of it is actually audited financial statements because it came from year one, which were obviously previously audited. So heavy level of reliability for part of it, and overall generally reliable for all of it. All right. Part two. Expectation based on square footage of industry data. So we had to actually look at some information here that was given external disclosure. If we go to, it was like the last tab. Yeah, National Fitness Association. They say, oh, come on, don't do this to me. No, I don't know why. There we go. All right. So talk about revenue per square foot, and then it actually disaggregates that information about how much area square foot was for the organization. It's 14,550. And so we can actually use that to make an expectation. So this is actually pretty straightforward. So if we talk about the year sales actual, that's given in the income statement, which is 1,506,900. What about the expected sales? We take that information from the National Fitness Association and multiply 105.6 times 14,550. What do we come up with?
153640.
1536480. Everybody feel good about that? All right. So this is our expectation. This is our actual. What's the difference? Yep. What's our conclusion about that? What do you guys think? Is that material or immaterial? By definition, it's immaterial because it's less than $40,000. Okay. Our tolerable difference in the situation is going to be $40,000. If it's less than that, we can tolerate it. So we're pretty happy with that. We're going to say difference is immaterial, no further investigation necessary, which is nice because that was a simple calculation. This would be a moment if I'm an auditor and I go into this, I'd be just kind of like, oh my gosh, that is a load on my back. Okay. I can actually maybe have 8 hours of sleep tonight. It'd be great. It'd be great. All right. What about the reliability of the data, guys? Fairly have a high reliability of the data. Some of it's internal, but we actually are using an external piece of information, external projection to actually develop our expectation. So we can say this is going to be reliable. All right, part three where things were maybe go off the rails. All right. So we already know the actual sales item or sale revenue, 1,506,900. Okay. Now we're going to actually develop an expectation, and a couple of these are going to be pieces of information. So first of all, if we look at this particular, this is not, oh, okay. So commission percentage from 4 to 5% for all sales was changed to year two. So basically there's expectation of 5% commission. Well, if we look at the income statement, commission expense is 78,900. So 78,900 divided by 0.05 gives us an expectation of 1,578,000. Is that what everybody else got? Hope so, because that's basically what the expectation is. Now, here's the deal. The dollar difference is 71,000. Now, here's the deal. Before we can even answer this question, we have to assess the reliability of this calculation. What do you guys think about the reliability of this calculation? Anybody have a problem with this calculation being reliable? See some nods, but why is this not a reliable calculation? So let me ask you this. Are sales a function of commission expense, or is commission of expense a function of sales? Yes. So using commission expense to project sales, is that going to be a reliable method of doing so? No, because one isn't a function of the other. It's a little bit like a circular cell reference in Excel. You can't actually come to a conclusion because you're trying to project one on the other, but one is naturally a function of the previous. All right. So this would be one of those ones that I'd say, I'm not going to use commission expense to project sales because I already know that commission's expense is a function of sales. So what commission expense should be derived from sales, not the other way around. So reliability of data here, I'm going to say this is not reliable. So if that's the case, does it really matter what the significance of the difference is? No. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say, look, this method's unreliable. I have to perform alternative procedures. Now, the good news is if we have all these particular procedures available to us, we've got two methods where we come up with difference of immaterial. So this third one is probably irrelevant, but if this is the only one available to us, this would mean we have extra work to do. Any questions on this? So hopefully you found your way through this. Again, we're going to see a lot of this. Some of this is going to be pretty straightforward. Some of it's going to be frustrating. Again, frustration is part of the experience. The goal is not to be frustrated, to be frustrated now and not to be frustrated when you actually sit for the exam. All right, have a good weekend. See you guys on Monday for Enron.